Good evening, and welcome to Health Plus Weekly. I am Dr. John Podkowa. I'm joined by our co-host, nurse practitioner Hannah Raymond, and we are excited to welcome to the studio tonight Dr. Jennifer Pope, the chair of the St. Luke's Emergency Department, and two of her star nurses who are accompanying her, Michelle Acevedo, director of emergency services, and Lori Frazier, director of patient care manager.
Patient care manager, yes.
Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Before we get started with tonight's great show, just a couple of announcements. Tomorrow, Thursday, June 21st, it is the Food for Tots, again in the Fall River area. 15% of your bill at selected restaurants in the Fall River area will be donated to the Southcoast Health in support of pediatric care at Southcoast. If you go on our Facebook page, you can search for Food for Tots and see the participating restaurants where you can dine and contribute. And we want to thank Plymouth Investment Advisors for their generous donation in terms of matching those donations this month. Camp Angel Wings has a few spaces left for children who have lost a loved one. Ages 6 through 15, the camp will be on July 14th and 15th in Asona, Massachusetts. In addition to great summer camp activities like arts and crafts and swimming, the camp also helps facilitate conversations around loss so children feel comfortable in their own environments in processing their grief. And if you visit southcoast.org for more information, you can find out more details about the camp. Finally, with the summer and the warm weather, kind of a common topic we talk about on the show is nutrition and food. We're happy to announce the South Coast farm stands have started again. The next one will be tomorrow at the South Coast Business Center in Fairhaven, located right in the parking lot. The center is located on the intersection between Bridge Street and Mill Street in Fairhaven, and then the following day, Tuesdays, will be at St. Luke's and Wednesday at Charlton Memorial Hospital. The stands at all locations are open from 2 to 5 p.m. So you can get some fresh food and just kind of do a lot towards improving your nutrition and just overall well-being.
The community.
Yeah, and support the community, which is really nice.
Which is great.
Tonight's show, we have, again, our colleagues from the St. Luke's Emergency Department on to talk about, a host of different things. Starting with, first and foremost, we always like to ask our guests how you wound up here at St. Luke's, and more importantly, working in the emergency department. So anyone can go first, but it's kind of a bit of an icebreaker.
So I'll start. I am a New Bedford native, and I actually started working at St. Luke's Hospital in the cafeteria when I was 16 years old. And I had many ancillary roles at St. Luke's in my younger years. I worked in the ED as a technician before I was a nurse. I worked in the OR as a technician. I went to nursing school after being a home health aide for South Coast. I worked for New Bedford EMS as an EMT while I was going to nursing school. I received my nursing degree in 2002, and I wanted to continue my practice at St. Luke's. However, they didn't offer a program for new to practice nurses within specialty areas like the emergency department, which was my first love. Today we do offer those programs, and I'm very excited about that, but at that time they didn't. So I left to pursue my nursing career at another organization, but came back to South Coast 7 years later because it is my community, it's where I want to practice. I practiced in the emergency department as a staff nurse. I was there for a couple of years in that role. I also worked at Charlton Memorial as an IV therapist in the nursing division. I was offered a position within South Coast to develop their transfer center program, which still exists today. I was in that role for 4 years, and then I took the director position just about 5 years ago.
Great. Oh, that's wonderful. So you came home.
I came home.
And here you are. Mm-hmm. What about you, Lori?
So I made this my home. I originally come from the South Shore. My folks come from Southie. And back when I started nursing, I started at Parkwood, which was a small hospital in the North End. And South Coast bought that hospital before they became South Coast. And so I went to St. Luke's, to the emergency department, and was per diem there, calling them every day for every shift until I got a position on the night shift where I started there. I stayed there for 24 years, 15 of them as a resource nurse, and then the manager position came open, and then I finally threw my hat in the ring to become the manager.
Great.
So that was 8 years ago.
There you've been. So how do you work together like, how do you intersect? Because it seems like you have a lot of,
So
common.
we work very close together
Yeah.
on a daily basis. Lori is very close to the operations of the department
Okay.
and is responsible for a large number of employees, nurses on a daily basis. Overall, we have 200+ employees in the emergency department, and so we work very closely and communicate to make sure operations continue to flow with many challenges, in a very busy department in a community hospital.
Right, oh, that's great.
Round with our patients, work closely with our patients to meet their needs. We have a diverse population in New Bedford, so we try to meet all of their needs, whether it's a pediatric patient or an older adult patient or a behavioral health patient. We make sure that the nursing staff is overseeing and rounding on their patients with hourly rounding and bedside handoff, and that we touch base with our patients on a daily basis.
Great.
Jen, how about you?
I grew up in Connecticut area and trained in Boston at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. I was on staff there working with a residency for quite a few years, and I'm part of Associate Physicians of Harvard Medical Faculty Physicians. The Beth Israel has had a long-term relationship with St. Luke's actually for 10+ years because their senior residents from the emergency medicine residency program rotate at St. Luke's.
Okay.
And it is their #1 away rotation from the Beth Israel. They love it down here. This is an incredible place. They meet incredible people. And just the size of the ED and the pathology, it's really been their favorite place to work. And about 5.5 years ago, they approached our group to sort of join, and we are honored to come down here and run their emergency department for the last 5.5 years. I did live in Boston, and then I moved my husband and kids down to Westport, so I live in the area.
I can't, just before the show we were talking about you've been here 5 years, I can't believe it. I've been, because I feel like it's been fast, it hasn't been that long, but I want to say, like, just in terms of my patients and interacting with the ED, like, what an amazing job, like, you have all done in terms of, we talk a lot about the show about prevention and, in wellness and but unfortunately, we can't protect everything, and when emergencies happen, it's really, really nice to know that we have this resource right locally in our neighborhood that is fantastic, and the work you've done, and because you had a lot to change when you came in, and there was great things happening, but what was really great is that you kind of kept what was good and then built on to make it better. And how's that been? Like, kind of tell us a bit about it.
Amazing, very whirlwind and incredible, but we can't thank everyone's patience and support over the last 5.5 years of really just sort of rebuilding, reworking, working together to improve the efficiency and quality of care that we deliver to patients and their families in this community. We know no one ever wants to go to the emergency room. It's not fun, it's not exciting, but people come and their patients and families are scared, they're in pain, and they're looking for help. And we do our best to make them comfortable, give them a safe place to be, and then hopefully, care for them with the highest quality of care.
So recently there were some renovations and improvements that went on in the actual structure, and a big change, and actually today is the 1-year anniversary of the Rapid Assessment Zone, or the RAS that you guys refer to it as. Could you talk about kind of how that came to be, the changes structurally and like kind of within the staff, and how it's been over the last year?
I'll let them sort of describe how the operational works, but the reason behind it was we're one of the top 3 busiest community emergency departments in the state of Massachusetts, and what we were finding is we had providers in the back of the ED ready to see patients, wanting to see patients, but we had no physical space. And patients come to the emergency room, they need to get tests, sometimes they need CAT scans, ultrasounds, or assessments from other specialists, and we just couldn't get patients back fast enough. And so we recognized first and foremost we had to improve our own internal process, so how you work yourself and how you communicate and how you communicate with patients. And so we worked on that first, and then we sort of proved, we need more space. We want to deliver efficient care. Patients are far safer back with us behind the walls than in the waiting room. And so we proposed, after a 1.5 years of sort of internal work, blowing up our waiting room, literally taking over our waiting room, and opening up something called the Rapid Assessment Zone, which I'll let you guys talk about.
So essentially, as Dr. Pope explains, the waiting space that we had was quite large. And so we utilized that to actually make patient care spaces. So we added an additional 10 beds to an 8-bed area of the emergency department, which is now known as the Rapid Assessment Zone. And we changed the entire model of emergency medicine on how patients, enter the department, how they're initially screened, and where they go for their treatment in the department to streamline that process for them. So it was a 4-year process from beginning to end, and looking at our own internal areas for improvement before we went ahead and said we definitely need more space to be able to accommodate our patients and the community. We didn't we didn't develop this, we replicated it. It does exist in other emergency departments in our local area in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. We visited those facilities, we identified how their processes worked, and then we customized it to what we needed in our community. I'll let Lori talk a little bit about how it operationalizes itself.
So when we did, it takes a village. So we got, the senior leadership team took a huge leap of faith on us at Southcoast to give us the leeway to build the RAS unit. But it started with the staff. So really it was the staff that we put on these teams to get their feedback about the people that actually do the work at the bedside, the real heroes of this story are the nurses and the techs in the emergency room and the entire team that gave their feedback, sat with us on performance improvement teams. And so now when a patient comes in, they're seen by a greeter, and that person has multiple responsibilities. They speak multiple languages, they have patient access skills, and then they're screened by a pivot nurse who is out front working with our patients to see who is appropriate for the RAS, and we can see and get them back home quickly, and who needs a larger workup, and who goes to the main ED and sees the physician back there.
And it's very dependent on the day, right? It's an emergency room still. We can't predict who needs help that day or what's going to happen. And so sometimes in the rapid assessment zone, patients with very important issues, but maybe less life-threatening, will be seen back there. So ankle sprains, lacerations, back pain. Some days, depending on the volume and how sick patients are in our department, you could be there with belly pain or chest pain. But the goal is to really get the care team to patients fast.
So the level of care is the same, whether you're in the RAS or the regular emergency room. You're not getting a less experienced practitioner.
Not at all.
You're seeing the same people. Just
Do you
in a
build
different
rooms? So are the patients in rooms in terms of how did that design work?
So we actually worked with an architect firm to help do computer modeling for some of these things. Now, for an emergency department, computer modeling is challenging, but in general, it gave us a sense of what we need. These are curtained rooms. Some have doors, some are curtains, but again, the goal is to get patients seen by that care team, which is a nursing team, a technician, and then either a board certified or board eligible emergency physician or a emergency trained physician assistant. We work together always, and that's who they'll be seen by.
And my best friend is an emergency physician in Pittsburgh, and we talk about kind of waiting room times and time and left without being seen. How has that changed? How has it improved?
Go ahead, go brag.
Yeah, no, this is it. Go brag. Let's talk about this, right?
You know what happens when you go to people and say, we have one of the busiest EDs in the state, and I want to get rid of my waiting room entirely, right? You can imagine the eye rolling that happens and the non-believers that exist. But right now, at the 1-year mark today, we have seen 94,000 patients in the last year, and our left without being seen rate is 0.8%, which is incredibly far below the national average for an emergency department our size. The year before, we saw about 91,000, and our left without being seen was 2.6%. So major headway.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You know what I mean? Like, it really is. I think the best part about kind of working in a system like ours is just like what all you just described in terms of it just doesn't, none of us can do this by ourselves, and the collaboration and the leeway, in the trust and just spearheading it. So that's, what is it, 0.8%?
8%. Yeah. And I can't tell you how proud of our team we are. I mean, literally.
Without a doubt.
They just work hard, they do it with a smile.
Is the staff happy? They must be happier, right? Because probably the patients are happier, right? And it kind of creates probably a culture,
thrilled.
right, and an environment that is better, right?
Well, we're hearing much more positive comments from patients when I round with the patients, how just amazed they are that there's no wait. And we came from a place where there were long wait times. So rebuilding that trust with our patients that they can count that this process is solidified and that it's consistent is something we work on every day.
The important thing to remember, though, is that it is an emergency department, and Mondays nationally are the busiest days for an emergency department. So I will tell you honestly that on a Monday afternoon, evening, there is going to be people in the waiting room, right? We just do not, it's unpredictable what will come in, between trying to help patients with acute medical needs, patients waiting for placement for psychiatric facilities, and just volumes on Mondays, oftentimes we will build up a waiting room then. But in general, these are average times that we have, and our goal is to get that waiting room down to 0.
I mean, I tell my patients in terms of like going to the emergency room, and I used to work in the hospital as as an internist and then as a hospitalist, and sometimes in the office they'd be like, oh, I'm waiting here for so long, it's taking so long, and I would always say, listen, you don't want to be rushed back into the emergency room if you don't have to be. It's a good thing in the sense of that they're taking their time to get to you in terms of what's going on in your life. It can have a bit of appreciation that someone's having a bad, like there are emergencies and it's called that and they're unpredictable. And we struggle with that when seeing patients in the office and trying to remain on schedule, Some people are like, why am I waiting? And you're like, well, unfortunately, it's not, buying a washer and dryer. It's someone can come in with something, more complicated, and we give the attention that people deserve and trying to tease that out and predict that. But it is unpredictable.
And I think that's an important point to mention, as Lori alluded to, that there's conversations that happen when people are waiting, that management leadership go out to the waiting room and explain to patients why it is that they're waiting. It doesn't make their wait time any better, but it relieves their anxiety about, there is a reason why that's happening. And I think just having the explanation as to the why, kind of settles people's anxiety about it. And we oftentimes, hesitate to have our staff give wait time specifically because it's very difficult to maintain that expectation, and that's what most people want when they come. How long is it going to be? How long am I going to wait? And so we try to answer their questions regarding times without giving them a specific time limit because it is unpredictable and dependent on what comes in, and that's a very challenging conversation to have, but the staff do it exceptionally well.
And I think in talking with patients, reminding them that you could be on the other side of that in kind of this like like a social compact, but just kind of just putting them in someone else's shoes in terms of we're all trying really hard.
A little empathy every day is a good thing.
Connect those dots for them and explain to them that what the plan is to have them seen. It's very helpful.
Well,
and you can address some of their needs in the waiting room.
Right. All the changes you've made have certainly not gone unnoticed. We have a comment from Jennifer Price who said she couldn't be happier with the care provided at St. Luke's. The physicians, nurses, and management staff that make the excellent care possible for the Southcoast region is nothing short of amazing. So thank you.
Thank you.
So, and Rosa says #1 team. So you guys are great. So there is, a couple of things that we wanted to touch on there's a piece of legislation in Massachusetts that is on a ballot question for November that may impact kind of all the great work that you guys have done to kind of decrease the wait times. I know that we had kind of spoken before, Michelle and Lori, about what that might impact. So what are your thoughts on that and kind of the impact it will have on wait times and the ED experience?
So we're nervous. I mean, the legislation that's proposed and going on the ballot this November will be for nurse-patient ratios. So that legislation is very rigid and proposes that we have, nurse-patient ratios at all times, no matter what. And it's based on acuity, and our acuity varies across the board. So where we see critical patients every day, every hour, that would be a 1-to-1 nurse patient, and sometimes we need 1 to 2. Sometimes we need 1 to 3. It depends on how sick the patient is. But we need that flexibility because the outcome of that legislation, if it passes and people vote that in, because it sounds wonderful to have nurse-patient ratios, but it takes that judgment away from nursing to make those decisions about how we flex the staff and how many patients we can see at any given time, including the waiting room. So what that will do, that is also impacts our partners and colleagues on the inpatient side, and if they don't have the appropriate nurse-patient staffing ratios, then that's going to lead to boarding in the emergency room.
So they won't be able to accept patients who are being admitted from the emergency room.
And that will lead to increased boarding times in the emergency room, which will limit our ability to see patients
In the emergency
in the
room.
emergency department.
Okay, great. So I think that's important for kind of people to understand, because as you said, on the face value of it, of course I would only want one nurse
Of
taking
course,
care
everyone
of me,
loves a
but-
nurse.
But in reality, there is, a judgment and a flexibility that might need to take place and will certainly impact kind of the work that you can, the improvements that you've made.
And that's what emergency nurses are trained to do. That's part of their job. So it's almost like taking away part of their job is determining, multitasking, figure out resource utilization, who needs what. So it is, although to face value, I understand is very appealing, is a pretty scary concept. And what that will do to our patients and families in the community in terms of having to wait longer for care everywhere, maybe be turned away at some points, and really not get the attention that we're trying to do right now, which is just get them through the ER doors.
Great. What else what else are you proud of in the 5 years that you've been here in terms of, really transforming the emergency department, and what's next, I think, in terms of,
So we have a really awesome team. We've had pretty significant changeover about 5 years ago in staffing, and have recruited an amazing physician and physician assistant and NP team to the emergency department. So we have an incredible dedicated staff who either live in the area or live close by. We've formed an incredible relationship with our nursing and tech and unit coordinator partners. And I think that's, once you have this really solid team, we can do anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how RAS happened. And that's how sort of more projects will happen down the line. We are looking forward to seeing what happens with a trauma designation for our facility and for Southcoast Hospital Group. Don't have enough information on that yet, but I think our patients in the community deserve to have a local trauma center for us to be able to manage patients with multiple injuries as a team with our incredible specialists. I mean, we really have amazing specialists in the community with the vascular surgeons, the orthopedic doctors, the thoracic surgeons, just a great team. And so we hope that would be on the horizon in the next few years for our team, and we'd be up for the challenge.
That would be exciting.
Yeah. How much trauma do you see in terms of, and for patients in terms of, so we're talking about car accidents, God forbid, gunshot wounds, stabbings, right? There's two different types of trauma. There's like blunt and penetrating.
Do you want to speak to the law of Rhode Island? So right now, currently, EMS has to take patients that they assess as trauma patients to the nearest comprehensive level 1 trauma center, which for us is Rhode Island Hospital. So a lot of these patients bypass us. Patients still come to us in the backs of trucks and in cars with in trauma situations, and we care for those. But I think that this South Coast has done an amazing job in identifying gaps in our community. That's how you got the cancer center, women's services. That's because South Coast looks at our community as a whole and identifies the gaps of them. And so right now their attention's on trauma. So we're excited to see where that takes us.
We see lower acuity trauma on a daily basis, so car accidents, bicycle accidents, motorcycle accidents. And then if someone has been in an accident or has been stabbed or shot, if they are what we call unstable in the medical world, so they're not breathing, their heart's not beating, they will come to us, and we will do our best to stabilize them and, if needed, transfer them. That being said, we encourage anyone who has had an injury, whether it be a stab wound or a gunshot wound, who is afraid to seek care, to always come seek care, because we will never, our doors are open 24/7, and we will see anyone who walks through our doors. So especially with the summer months coming, people are outside a lot, there's a lot of activity about, we encourage anyone to seek help. And friends will bring their friends to us after a stabbing or a shooting to get help, and that's what our job is.
Summertime's trauma time.
Summertime's trauma time. What about pediatrics? in terms of, is that with pediatrics too? And in terms of services for children, an important part, and, in terms of what percentage of your volume is that, and then what do we, because I think, just to make sure we cover, all bases here.
So it's about a quarter of our volume.
17 to 18%
of
pediatrics.
Wow.
Pediatrics. We have an affiliation with Boston Children's Hospital. We have a specialty area within the emergency department, a 5-bed area, 5 formal bed, but they have the availability to flex that a little bit to take up to 6 to 7 patients in that area. A Boston Children's Hospital provider, pediatric provider that works in that area, seeing pediatric patients from the hours of 11 a.m. to 11 p.m.
Okay.
So I think that's an important point to mention. We see pediatrics everywhere in the emergency department. Your child will not wait to be seen to be in that area. We don't hold patients in the waiting room for that purpose. If a family requests a Boston Children's provider and to be in that area specifically, we honor that request to the best of our ability.
How do you choose whether it goes to the pediatric, kind of the Boston Children's side, or the traditional ED, or how does that work?
It depends on bed availability and really the acuity of the patient.
Okay.
So, and as Michelle alluded to, the request of the family.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people request that, and that could mean that they would have to wait for that bed availability to be seen by the Boston Children's doctors. But all of our physicians are board certified in emergency medicine and have the ability, and they provide excellent care to children
And that
in our
includes
community.
pediatric care, emergency
Excellent.
care.
Yeah, a big part of your training is in
Huge part,
pediatric.
actually. And we see a lot of kids.
Yeah.
Luckily, most are healthy.
Yes.
And we are
That's the
happy to see them at any time, but it is a huge part of our service every day.
Okay.
And when we started affiliating with Children's, I think we saw like 12,000 children.
The volume
And
has definitely
we
increased.
increased it to about 20,000 children that we see now.
And it's an absolute benefit to the community
Without
whose
a doubt.
children have, their primary care, have, a medical history where they've had to seek medical care at Boston Children's to keep them local. So they're able to see providers. Those providers are able to access their records from Boston Children's, are able to access the specialists and have conversations and be able to manage most things within the community. So families don't have to travel into town, and spend that extra time. They can have that care locally.
We also recognize that the emergency department is not the best place for kids, right? And so we really try to get kids in and out, get the care that they need and get them home.
Oh, that's awesome.
Right. We have another question from Jennifer asking, what types of services does St. Luke's ED offer to timely treatment of an acute stroke? And also with reference to the RAS model, how do you differentiate between who goes where?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can comment on our stroke services. So we are an accredited stroke center, and we have both trained our greeters, but more so our paramedics in the community to recognize stroke symptoms, and they will call in an alert for anyone presenting with stroke-like symptoms. As soon as that patient arrives, they will be what we call triggered, which means there's an overhead that says trigger to room 3, and a physician, the nursing resource, the resource nurse, primary nurse, and a tech have to go to that room. We then make decisions based on the history and physical exam and get them right to our CAT scan table to look for evidence of bleeding on the brain, and have more advanced pathways now for people with larger strokes where there's actually a clot blocking the blood flow, causing a very large stroke. We do use medicines, clot busting medications called TPA to help with some patients who qualify, but we also work with our partners at Rhode Island Hospital, our neurointerventional team, for patients who have a clot stuck in a vessel. They can actually go up through the groin and retrieve them. We practice this on a daily basis in terms of timing, efficiency, getting patients to the scanner, working with our neurologist at Southcoast.
Time is brain
Exactly.
in terms of,
Exactly, and so that's how we handle our stroke patients. We want to talk about who goes where to RAS versus main.
Well, you would identify them by their symptoms. And then, once they're identified, we call at St. Luke's, we call a code green. And that alerts everybody within the system so that we can clear the table from CAT scan to get that patient right there. In the field, if they call a stroke alert in the field, then we would overhead, code green EMS, and we give the ETA. So 8 minutes before they come, and then they have the ability to coordinate the team, coordinate a room, clear the CAT scan table, and our EMS providers, and one of our physicians sits He's the EMS liaison, has done a lot of work with education on stroke, and they'll take the patient directly to CAT scan.
Great. So you work very closely with the community. I think we had a shout out to there was EMS awareness and, thing a couple weeks ago, and so we gave them a shout out. So you obviously work very closely with the partners in the community.
Yes, we could not do this job without them.
What percentage of patients come in via ambulance, ballpark, and versus coming through like
30%, about
30 to
30%,
35,
yeah.
I think.
Okay.
We do.
So we always talk about one of our main focuses on the show is, the wonderful resources that we have in the community. So we've talked about, expediting getting into the ER, getting seen, and then, getting hopefully sent home. We always like to talk about how to stay out of the, how to stay out of the ER, especially as you said in the summer, more activity, kind of people are out and about, and you probably see an uptake of accidents and kind of summer-based injuries. So, what are some tips for staying out of the ER? Some of the more common things that you see, during the summer months.
What do you wish people knew?
Take sunscreen seriously.
Do you see a lot of that?
We do see sunburns. We do see people, need to know that they should put on sunscreen, they should reapply sunscreen, excuse me, and take the sun seriously. When Kelly Bates gets on the news and says safe sun is like 8 to 10 minutes, take it seriously. Wear a hat, put on your sunscreen.
One of the common themes on the show we talk about too is like when to worry. So when do you worry if maybe your child or someone has had too much sun? Because there's a difference, right, between a sunburn and, God forbid, something more serious in terms of. So what would what do we tell people?
So I think the key is obviously the sun can be more dangerous for the very young and the very old, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how we think about it, and people who don't have the same immune system as maybe you or I. And so the key is for kids and adults, apply sunblock, wear a hat. When you start to get too hot, get into the shade. Drink plenty of fluids. Make your kids stop and take a break, even if it's to give them an ice cream in the corner. Maybe not be totally healthy, but
It's all right.
Sunbreak.
yeah, exactly. Just to give them those breaks from the sun. Things to look for are when patients are sleepier than they should be after being in the sun all day. If people are persistently vomiting, people develop a fever,
Confusion.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's really important to watch out for your older neighbors who may or may not have air conditioning on certain days, because they cannot handle the heat like we can, and they are much more at risk for heat stroke than other people. And so those are some of the tips in terms of just staying cool, staying in the sun, wearing sunblock, drinking lots of water. Avoid large amounts of alcohol or other substances while being in the sun, because that will affect you more, and your body will not recognize it needs to get out of the sun faster.
The Center for Disease Control, I was just reading, kind of published, I think the most recent data was like 2016, and it just reported like a markedly high, rate of, accident-related deaths for young people. Do you see that in terms of the leading cause of death for young people? When we see patients, we talk about, safety in terms of how important it is. A lot of it comes your way, you know what I mean? So what's driving a lot of it? Yeah.
Seat belts, car accidents certainly, for safety. Texting while driving, obviously, something that we see quite frequently, people not paying attention to those types of things.
Appoint a designated driver. If you plan to go out and have something to drink, appoint a designated driver. Don't drink and drive.
Also, too, like being aware of when you're driving, if you're sober and just out, in terms of being out late at night and just being on the offensive, in terms of being on the car, in the car. We have a number of patients who are, police or state troopers, and it was interesting talking to, some of them. There's one retired, police officer was talking about his daughter and her boyfriend, how he recommended, that they stay out after a certain, it was like 1 o'clock, and he kind of was talking to her parents and saying, like, I think it's safer than to stay at your house because, no offense, like, nothing good happens on the road after 1 a.m. in terms of, and I'd rather her not drive home.
Yeah.
Which is really, I thought, like a really powerful statement in terms of who's out there. You could do your best intentions, but if someone's out there in terms of their problem could become your problem.
Absolutely. The other thing is bicycles and motorcycles. So that's really what ticks up for us. We see car accidents year round, but really the bicycle and motorcycles accidents really kick up. And I just can't stress the helmet enough. I hear these parents talking to their kids about wearing a helmet, and then you see them on their bike without a helmet, riding with their kid with the helmet. I mean, it just blows my mind.
Yeah.
You gotta wear a helmet. I cannot tell you how important it is to protect that brain from even just hitting a pothole and falling and hitting your head could be life-threatening. So important to wear that helmet. The other thing is with scooters, motorcycles, it's not just about your skill on the bike, it's the people around you.
And dress appropriately.
Yeah.
Dress appropriately.
Absolutely.
In terms of skin protection,
yes.
if you were to fall.
Absolutely. Some of those accidents, one fall, and it's fatal.
Catastrophic.
And they should know in the summertime, kids are out of school.
Mm-hmm.
Kids are out of school, they're out later, it's light, longer, so be a cautious driver, because those kids
Anticipating
be a defensive driver and be careful.
And I can't help but notice, I mean, we see it to a degree in primary care, but kind of the looks on your faces when talking about accidents, where it's like, gee, I wish people could see this when you're talking about texting and driving and wearing a helmet, and just kind of the catastrophic injuries and accidents that can happen from that. And it's not something you like to think about, but I think it's a kind of a humbling and kind of a reality check for people that it does happen and it can happen to you. So, and I think we can sometimes lose sight of that in primary care, where we're talking about a lot of well visits and things like that, but you can just tell it impacts the people who take care of those accidents too. Yeah.
Do you see a lot of swimming-related injuries, drownings? I mean, there was just...
Yes. Hopefully not a lot. That is our goal. We want people to stay healthy and safe.
Yeah.
I think swimming alone is incredibly dangerous, just in case something were to happen to you, whether you hit your head or actually suffer a medical emergency while swimming. So I always recommend that you swim with a buddy. For parents and kids, be aware, turning your eyes for a second or checking your phone for a second while your child's in the pool can also be catastrophic. Floaties for kids, teach your kids pool and water safety. But yes, we can see that. There's also a large concern recently about dry drowning, the concept of children aspirating water and getting inflammation of their lungs. There's some mixed data on that. Just the important thing about that is if your child develops a fever and difficulty breathing, you should always seek care.
Yep.
Don't think twice about it, just get the help that you need. Hopefully your child will be fine, but it's hard to say because kids swallow water all the time, right? They get hit by wind, they knocked over, and they stand up giggling, right? So it's really too hard to predict, but just to teach your loved ones and any child care provider that they're with about sort of pool and water safety.
We don't want to be killjoys, we know that people have pool parties. We know people have pool parties, and with pool parties, excuse me, comes alcohol. But you should, just with a designated driver, you should have someone who's designated to be clear-headed.
Push you around the float.
So this just happened last weekend. I was away at my brother and sister-in-law's house. They have a big fishing tournament, and inevitably, I was like taking a shower, got out, and I got the, "Hey, John, could you take a look at this?" And holding his hand, and he had caught himself with, kind of filleting a fish. So, two questions in terms of, but like, when is it, when to come for stitches? You know what I mean? Because that was the question, right? Like, do I need to like go in, or is this going to be okay in terms of when to come in, and maybe some loose guidelines in terms of what should be checked out and what.
So the first thing to do if you ever cut yourself is wash it really well with soap and water. It's going to bleed when you do that. Wash it really well with soap and water, and then apply direct pressure. So wrap some bandages, take some paper towel, whatever, wrap it up and apply some direct pressure. Wounds that are not deep and don't open when you move a finger or an extremity typically will not need sutures. Wounds that open when you bend your hands, kind of like exactly, when they gape open, whether they're on your hand, your arm, or your face, those will typically need sutures. Things that won't stop bleeding. But I will say it's important to apply pressure for 10 to 15 minutes. It's amazing what will stop when you apply pressure. The other thing I will say is that if you need sutures, you really should have sutures placed within the first 8 to 10 hours of an injury. With the face, it's more 24 hours. But it's very important, if you're going to seek care for it, to do it soon after the injury and not wait a day or two. Because after a day or two, we won't be able to help you. It will heal, but you may have a scar. So that's sort of the
Yeah.
So that reminds me of fish hooks. So
Yeah.
in the summertime, we see a lot of fish hook injuries. We've had fish hooks to the face, mostly fish hooks to the hand, but don't try to take it out at home. Come and see us. We are experts at taking out fish hooks. And it's a huge summer recreation, so please come see us. We know how, we're experts at removing them.
Other things that people to try to take out by themselves,
Let's get to the good stuff here.
right? That they do a lot of harm. Let's talk tick bites, because
bites.
I'm sure every now and again you see a tick bite.
I've never seen one.
Yeah, right. So let's talk about when ticks, when to worry, the damage that in terms of taking ticks off,
Absolutely.
right?
So tick season is here. It's long been here. It's been here for months. Okay. So if there's a tick crawling on you, flick it off, take a tissue, flush it down the toilet, just get rid of it, okay? It cannot transmit any tick-borne illnesses that way. If you find a tick stuck on you, the best way to remove a tick is to take a pair of tweezers and get as close to your skin as possible and pull the tick up and off. Do not squeeze the tick and pop it. If you do not have tweezers, take a tissue and grab it as close to your skin as possible and pull up and out, okay? There will always be some black mark in your skin. That does not need to be removed, okay? Once the majority of the tick has been taken off and is dead, the little piece of the tick that is still in you cannot transmit a tick-borne illness. And actually, you will do more harm than good by trying to dig it out with something.
Yeah, do not do surgery on yourself, please.
No, we see that in the office, and I imagine you do, and some bad things are done.
Skin infection secondary to that.
After you remove the tick, wash it with soap and water. You can even put a little bit of over-the-counter antibiotic ointment on it. And you should expect to see a red area at the site.
Immediately around.
Yeah, at the site of the tick bite within the next 24 to 48 hours. That is a normal reaction to any kind of bite, just like when you get a bug bite or a spider bite, okay? That is not the rash of Lyme disease, or it's called the EM rash, that we call it, or erythema migrans. So,
Which looks like more like an open-fisted slap to someplace on your body.
exactly.
Okay.
So that's normal. Ticks cannot, a tick has to be on you for almost 48 to 72 hours for it to transmit the Lyme disease that we talk about. There are other tick-borne illnesses like anaplasma and babesia that can get transmitted earlier, but a tick really has to be, one, engorged, and two, be on you for a good 2 days to transmit. So oftentimes if you see a physician or a nurse practitioner or a PA, they will ask you, do you have any idea when you had the tick on you? And was it engorged or blown up like a raisin? There's a prophylactic medication called doxycycline. We have some data to show that a one-time dose can decrease the risk of transmission of Lyme disease, but that's really only indicated if it's been on you for more than 36 hours and you are seen within a 72-hour window, and you're not pregnant, breastfeeding, or a child.
Yep.
So that's something to look for. It's important that if you have a tick bite, yesterday, and all of a sudden you develop a fever and body aches the next day, that's not from a tick-borne illness. Typically, symptoms developed within 1 to 2 weeks, and about 70% of people will actually get the rash that people talk about. Some people will never see the rash because it's on their back. And so it is possible to have a tick-borne illness without seeing a rash.
We talk about in the summer that you shouldn't get the flu. So if you have flu-like symptoms in the summer, it's worrisome because, to your point, like we tell people, you might not get the rash, you might not know you were bit by a tick, you might not have ever seen the tick. So fever, chills, joint pains, body aches in the summer, should raise your suspicion that there could be something going on.
We are actually seeing a different summer virus going through that's actually presenting very similar symptoms to tick-borne illness. I worked yesterday, I saw many patients
No
have
kidding.
similar symptoms, which I don't think are going to be tick-borne illness. There are summer viruses that come through.
And I see those at the same visits
Exactly.
in the office too. Yep.
Exactly.
Yep. Yep. So we have a couple of questions, one going back actually from my mom. I told you she was watching, so
Hello, Anne.
she
My
said,
name is Mom.
how do you know, what are your thoughts on when to go to the ER and about when to have a family member drive versus calling one of the wonderful EMS kind of staff that we have in the community?
So my recommendation would be if there's a question, you should call
Okay.
EMS.
So if you have
That's
any
always the
question at all.
safest
Okay.
way to get to us, if there's a question about what should happen. But obviously, anything, well, obvious to us, but maybe not to the
Yeah.
community, of any stroke-related symptoms, slurred speech, you can't move a part of your body suddenly, you find a family member is kind of, not communicating with you well or having trouble word finding, those are indicative of a stroke, so that would be something that you'd want to call EMS for. We see many family members that bring someone in with those types of symptoms, and we've lost time, because treatment can start with our EMS partners. When we talk about our partners,
It's
there's
a great
certainly
point.
that those are our partners. If you're having chest pain or shortness of breath, those are, primary concerns to call EMS. They can provide treatment on the trip to the emergency department. They can give you medications, aspirins. They can do EKGs, which they send directly remotely to the emergency department. That the emergency physician on shift looks at that EKG and can determine immediately whether or not they're having an acute heart attack. And at that point, our Center for Excellence for that is at Charlton. They have the interventional cath lab. So that physician would actually recommend that they bypass St. Luke's and go directly to Charlton. We'd have the cath lab activated, and they could receive those services immediately versus a stop with us.
And that's a program that you're piloting or doing, right? Helping like the certain ambulances get, right? Like the monitoring devices and the EKGs and transmitting to expedite that. That's a kind of another exciting partnership you guys are doing, right?
Yes, St. Luke's has funded that.
Yeah.
Well, Southcoast, has funded that for many of our EMS services. And so, New Bedford EMS was one of the first services to receive those monitors. So that's very beneficial to the community in terms of timely service. So those would be the things that I would.
I think you had a great point. If there's any question, just call. Yeah. We have another question from Andrew, and we kind of touched on this before the show. What are your thoughts on the local mental health situation as far as the overwhelming amount of people presenting to the emergency room seeking mental health treatment? And kind of the response to that from the emergency room.
I'm hoping that we'll have another show.
Yeah, we definitely will.
Talk about this, just because it's it is a huge issue, not only in our community, but in communities across the state and actually across the nation.
Yeah.
It is very frustrating that the emergency department is sometimes the only place for people to turn because of the limited outpatient resources we have. We do our best to offer services and help provide guidance, and highly trained social work teams and psychiatric nurse practitioners. But the reality is there needs to be more resources across the state to help provide care to our patients.
Before the emergency room is the last resort.
You guys do a fantastic job of managing that volume, in terms of our patients who have been there, and it's such Andrew, it's a great question, and we're going to have kind of a show in terms of some other kind of people who have community resources and how we take care of these patients, which we're excited to have you back on, because that is a team effort in terms of and we need to do more, but just raising the awareness, because taking care of perhaps the most fragile kind of component of our society is not light work, and how we're struggling to do it. And the other thing that we want to talk about, not that we want to keep having you back on, but we hope you do, is the opiate crisis. We're not addressing it tonight, per se, but it's been crippling. Tide's turning in a lot of ways. You see it, we see it. We work together on it, and we're going to talk more about that. We had a show in the fall or early winter with Holly Alexander, one of our local addiction medicine specialists, regarding Suboxone. You guys are doing some stuff regarding Suboxone in the emergency department to help it. So just for people listening tonight, stay tuned.
It deserves its own hour. So and Andrew did say that, on a side note, St. Luke's ED does a great job in mental health crisis. The social workers are awesome. So like you said, they deserve to come back, and we will certainly give that the attention that it deserves. A couple other questions in the queue. This is sometimes where we go into the rapid fire session. There was a question about a recommendation for safe types of sunscreen for babies, just if you had.
Yeah, absolutely. The highest number possible, right? So 50 SPF or higher. Frankly, babies shouldn't be in the direct sun. They have, if you're going to be out in the sun for a long period of time, they should be wearing hats. They can be wearing these, body onesie things that they sell that have some UV protection, but they still need to have sunblock underneath them. You just want to be the highest SPF possible. Careful with the spray sunblocks. I think they spray away into the breeze.
Right.
Yep. Just move it on and keep it in the shade.
Yeah, you can Google, there are sunblocks that are actually the SPF that they say. So you can Google those, and they're all over the news these days.
And any thoughts on coconut oil having a natural SPF, or is it just a fryolator?
I don't know.
I haven't heard anything about that, so Sarah will have to.
Yeah.
Sarah, I think I might work with your husband, so I'll have to get back with you on that one.
It sounds like a fryolator.
It sounds like a fryolator.
Yeah, I'm going with fryolator.
Yep.
What about bites, in terms of not just about like animal bites, human bites, in terms of when to worry, when to come in, antibiotics, another, it's important, in fish injuries, because sometimes maybe you do get the fish hook out, but there's lingering problems happening in terms of,
So bites, so human bites, if you sustain a human bite and it breaks the skin, you need to be seen. Not only is it at risk of infection, but there is a body fluid transmission issue in terms of putting you at risk for any kind of infection that the patient may have, whether it be hepatitis or HIV. So if you sustain a human bite and it breaks skin, you should be seen. When it comes to animal bites, the longer, the thinner the tooth, the deeper the penetration, the higher risk of infection, right? So cats, they may be small, but their bite is mighty, right? Those fangs just go right in, and it may cause a tiny puncture wound, but their tooth has gone much further than a dog bite, for example. So cat bites notoriously will cause infection. If it's your cat and you know them, you can wash with soap and water and apply topical antibiotic and do a little bit of a watch and wait, but any kind of increasing redness, pain, or redness tracking up your hand, you need to be seen right away. I will tell you, cat bites on the hand can be notoriously dangerous because it's a very small area with not a lot of space to swell, and so that you can get very bad infections of your fingers very quickly from cat bites. Dog bites, again, we recommend if it's a dog you know or your own dog, obviously you want to know about their rabies status. Although there's only been one case of rabies in New England in something like 50 years. That being said, again, you want to wash it really well, as some may need antibiotics. Raccoons, I hope you don't get bit by a raccoon, but there's reports of raccoon and squirrel bites. Right. You should seek medical treatment to discuss that with your provider.
In bats.
I'm just going to
right?
about bats.
Oh.
So if you have a bat in your house and you get it out and it doesn't bite anybody, you are not going to get rabies.
Okay, because people, right?
Right. They do recommend if you don't know or you've slept in a room that you come in to consider the rabies vaccine series, which is a series of vaccines.
And can we demystify that a little bit? Because people are petrified of rabies vaccines. There's a lot of it's really painful, you get a lot in your stomach, in terms of like the old versus new, things that they've changed. But what does that mean? Like what happens, and you do them in the emergency department, right?
Yeah. So if you come in and you've had an exposure where we have a discussion with you about the risks and benefits of the rabies vaccine, it's a series of 4 vaccines, spaced day 1, day 7, day 14.
It's okay.
We can wait. Something like that. But we have a whole handout on it, and you come back from the ED for the vaccine. It feels just like a vaccine. Again.
Not in the stomach anymore.
No.
Okay.
I mean, unless you guys are giving it to someone.
No, but right.
I think,
No.
Yes. Yeah.
No.
Myth busting here.
That's right. Just swear, not putting you on the spot.
Right.
Yeah.
In fairness, I don't give the vaccine.
Yeah.
But again, very low risk of rabies transmission in general, but when in doubt, seek medical care.
Okay. Anything in the queue?
And we're all caught up in queue. A lot of people watching, so hi everybody, thanks for tuning in. But we're all caught up in terms of questions right now.
For you guys, do we miss anything that we'd like to?
What about some of the synthetic drugs, just to touch on quickly? So we're going to do something on kind of the opiate crisis, but just quickly on some of the more dangerous things out there.
Yeah, I think it's just a good public service announcement. So obviously, alcohol in moderation may be safe, but people can really injure themselves and harm themselves when they drink alcohol in excess because you are uninhibited and you don't have the same control over your body. So I just can't tell people enough to have safe habits, consider where they are.
And I will echo that too. And just every week it seems like there's more studies coming out linking alcohol to cancer, right? I mean, just really, it's not benevolent in terms of like at the high end, the accidents and when you impair your senses, but also from long term, maybe possibly increasing, risks of cancer and other diseases.
Yeah.
So.
And I just don't think people realize that they can get intoxicated once, fall and hit their head, and it can, again, be catastrophic. So I put that out there. The other thing, vaping is a big thing. There is the marijuana oils that people are vaping, and I will tell you, we are seeing a lot of patients with side effects from that. I know they are packaged, and in theory, they can't be tampered with, but we are seeing patients on a regular basis who may smoke marijuana or vape on a regular basis, but are having cardiac side effects and other side effects that are very anxiety-provoking and can be dangerous for a period of time until they metabolize it. So I always like to put that out there. The other thing is the synthetic marijuana and the other drugs along those lines. Just a reminder, you can use it once and it can end your life. Not only what it does to you physically, but mentally, and how much of a danger you can become to yourself and to others around you. We've had umpteen patients come in, not only in with police, but with our paramedics, because they were such a danger to themselves because they were so agitated and could not control their body or their minds. They often require medications in an IV to help sedate them so they don't hurt themselves or others. Some people even need a breathing tube put into their lungs to have a machine breathe for them because they are at such a risk of endangering themselves. And again, you can use these drugs once and this can happen to you. So it's just important to realize how dangerous some of this stuff can be.
One last question about a migraine. Migraines can last for days. When should one go to the ER? That's probably something you see a lot, kind of concerning with
headaches, especially in the heat in the summer months. Absolutely. So I think people will know their bodies. Headaches that are different than your normal headache. Headache associated with a fever and neck stiffness. Headache associated with a rash. Headache associated with loss of vision or loss of movement. Those are things you really want to be seen for. People who get headaches on a regular basis usually know when it feels like their regular headache. You are always welcome to come see us if it's just to help with relief of the headache, or if you have a concern that it's something more than your usual headache.
A new headache, exactly. Pattern, and we certainly triage those in primary care.
You try to,
so,
absolutely.
That's something you could call us first, and we may be sending them to see our lovely friends. So that's it for questions so far.
Jen, Michelle, Lori, thank you so much for taking an hour out of your summer night to talk about these things with our people who listen. Thank you so much for all what you've done to the emergency department. I mean, we take care of a lot of patients, and it's awesome to just have them have a better experience there. We communicate. I love working with you in terms of real time talking with patients via on the phone. It's really we're really fortunate for your dedication and enthusiasm, and we look forward, if it's okay, to have you back to talk about some other areas that are really important that we are facing, that we need help kind of teaming up together and just spreading information, which is the point of the show. Really is to because unfortunately there's a bit of gap sometimes in terms of what people know and how much time we can spend with them. So here we can, which is nice.
Yeah, and we always have room for improvement, right? We're always open to feedback. We are honored to care for everyone in this community, and I can't just say enough what an incredible team we have in the ED, how big their heart is and how hard they work. So.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for coming.
The opportunity to brag about our staff.
Oh, we love it.
Well deserved.
We love it.
Yeah, well deserved. No questions in the queue? We're good?
We're good.
Thank you, everyone who tuned in and listened. I think tonight, more than in a long time, we'd ask that you share the show and tell people about it, because there was some really good kind of safety information talked about tonight that we'd like people to know about. So please, if you found the show interesting, share it. And also let people know about the updated services in the ED, because it's really been a bit of a game changer. And other than that, have a great night, stay healthy, and we'll see you next week, South Coast.
I started dancing at age 3, and I kept on dancing. I never stopped doing things. I liked to travel. I was walking in Iceland, and it was very painful. Not only are you in pain, but it's the fact that, oh, I don't think I better do this. I could create something that's worse than I have right now. And I really thought, I hope someone will listen to me. And that, I think, is the most important thing. And I was asked, what would you like to be able to do? And I said, I want to be able to do everything. I want to be me. I want to be able to walk. I want to be able to climb. I want to be able to dance. And I want to be able to feel secure. South Coast listened to me. I felt that it was my decision. I was in control of the situation. I felt a lot better about it. After the procedure, you feel liberated. You feel like you are your own person again. It's a wonderful, wonderful feeling. I've had good care. I've had people to answer all my questions. I feel secure. I've had surgery up in Boston at one point in my life. The care that I received here was far superior, and I just felt like I was home. I'm walking with a brand new hip, and it's doing very well, and I feel good. I'm back to where I want to be. There doesn't feel like I have anything that I can't do. When I was at the Jazz Fest and I heard the music and I started and I thought, you know what? I'm dancing again.